The royal palace stood tall and proud, a symbol of history and tradition. It had been a place of immense significance for centuries, housing the royal family and their loyal servants. Among the most visible and respected of these servants were the royal guards, soldiers who stood at attention, day in and day out, watching over the palace with unwavering commitment. Every day, these guards donned their crisp uniforms and polished helmets, standing still for hours on end. The rules were clear. Maintain perfect posture, never speak unless spoken to, and remain calm and focused no matter the circumstance. There was no room for error. It was a job that demanded total dedication and discipline. And the guards never failed in their duties. They were proud of their position, knowing they were part of something much larger than themselves. The palace, with its grand architecture and beautiful gardens, was their responsibility to protect. The guards' job wasn't just about looking strong and intimidating, though. It was about creating an atmosphere of respect and order. Tourists would often stand in awe as they passed the palace gates, taking pictures of the stern-faced soldiers standing completely still. Many people couldn't understand how the guards were able to stand there without moving for such long periods of time. It wasn't easy. They were trained to withstand discomfort, both physical and mental, and to endure the quiet loneliness of their posts. But the guards also understood the deep respect they earned from their position. As the eyes of the public watched them, they represented the tradition and history of the royal family. It wasn't just a job. It was a duty to preserve a legacy, one that had been passed down through generations. The guard's uniform, his precise movements, and his commitment to standing still were all symbols of something bigger than himself. Despite the strictness of their role, there was a certain pride that came with being a royal guard. They were seen as symbols of strength, duty, and honor. They knew that their presence added to the dignity of the royal family, and they never took that responsibility lightly. While most of the world moved quickly around them, they remained constant. No matter what happened in the outside world, their place was here, guarding the gates and standing watch. One guard, in particular, had become known for his unwavering focus. He had trained for years, preparing for this exact role. His posture was perfect, and his face never betrayed a single emotion. He was a model of discipline, and he took immense pride in carrying out his duties with precision. There was no room for distractions, no space for deviation from the rules. But even with all his training and dedication, the guard was, at heart, a human being. Like everyone else, he had moments of doubt and reflection, wondering if the strict rules were always the right way to approach life. But for now, he stood there, in the cold wind and bright sunlight, his eyes scanning the horizon, ready to face whatever came next. It was a life of service, and he had chosen this path with the utmost seriousness. The palace, with all its elegance and history, was his world, and he was devoted to protecting it. He understood the importance of the tradition he represented, and he couldn't imagine a day when he wouldn't be standing at his post. The weight of history was on his shoulders, but it was a weight he carried with pride. In a small town far from the grand palace, there lived a young girl named Emily. She was just 7 years old, but her life had already been filled with many difficult challenges. Emily had been battling cancer for some time, and it was a fight she was determined to win. Though the treatments were tough, and her body was growing weaker with each passing day, Emily never let go of her spirit. She was a brave little girl, always wearing a smile despite the pain she often felt. Her family, though worried and heartbroken over her condition, did everything they could to keep her happy. They often spoke to her about all the things she loved, trying to lift her spirits. Emily loved the idea of strength, both physical and emotional strength, and she admired brave people. She would often ask her parents to tell her stories about heroes who fought for what was right, about people who stood tall even in the hardest times. But there was one thing Emily admired above all else: the royal guards. She had seen them on television and in pictures, standing tall and strong at the royal palace. Their uniforms were perfectly pressed, their faces stoic and serious. Emily thought they looked like real-life superheroes. She loved how they stood perfectly still, showing so much control and discipline. To her, they represented everything strong and brave. She would often tell her parents that one day she wanted to meet one of them. Emily's wish seemed like a distant dream. After all, she was so far away from the palace, and her treatments took up most of her time. She was too sick to travel far, and her energy was always low. But one day, something unexpected happened. Emily's doctors, seeing her strong will and how much she dreamed of visiting the palace, decided to help make her wish come true. Through a special program for children with serious illnesses, they arranged for Emily and her family to visit the royal palace. The news filled Emily with so much joy that she couldn't believe it was real. She smiled brighter than ever, her eyes shining with excitement. It was all she had ever dreamed of, meeting a royal guard and standing beside them. Her parents were overjoyed as well, thrilled to see their daughter so happy despite everything she had been through. They made the necessary preparations for the trip, gathering everything they would need, and soon enough, the day arrived. The journey to the palace was long and tiring, but Emily was filled with anticipation. She could hardly wait to see the place she had admired from afar. Her heart raced as they neared the palace gates. Even though she was still tired from her treatments, the thought of meeting a royal guard kept her going. As they arrived at the gates of the palace, Emily's excitement grew with every step she took. The family was greeted by friendly staff who guided them through the grand palace grounds. The beauty of the place left Emily speechless. Everything was so much more magnificent than she had ever imagined. But it wasn't just the palace that amazed her. It was the royal guard standing at attention at the entrance. Emily's eyes widened, her heart fluttered, and she couldn't believe her dream was about to come true. As Emily and her family walked through the grand entrance of the palace, everything around her seemed like something out of a fairy tale. The palace grounds were vast and beautifully kept, with large trees lining the walkways and colorful flowers blooming in neat gardens. The air smelled fresh, and Emily felt a sense of wonder wash over her. She had only ever seen the palace in pictures and videos, but now she was actually standing there. It was all so much more magnificent than she could have ever imagined. Her parents walked beside her, gently supporting her as she took each step. Even though she was tired, the excitement of being at the palace gave her the energy she needed to keep going. Her eyes were wide with amazement as she looked at every detail: the tall stone walls, the impressive windows, and the magnificent architecture. She had read about palaces in books and seen them in movies, but nothing compared to the real thing. As they walked further, Emily's gaze landed on the royal guard standing tall in front of the palace gates. He was perfectly still, his uniform pressed to perfection, and his expression serious, yet somehow calming. To Emily, he looked like a statue, a symbol of strength and honor. Her heart skipped a beat as she realized she was about to get closer to someone she had admired for so long. Her family stopped a few steps away from the guard, and Emily's mother bent down to whisper in her ear, "Are you ready, sweetheart?" she asked gently, sensing her daughter's excitement. Emily nodded enthusiastically, her small hand tightening around her mother's. She had dreamed of this moment for so long, and now that it was finally here, she couldn't contain her joy. As they approached the guard, Emily couldn't help but feel a little nervous. She had imagined meeting him in her dreams, but now that it was happening, it felt almost surreal. The guard stood perfectly still, not moving an inch, his eyes focused straight ahead. Emily was in awe of his discipline. It was as though nothing in the world could distract him from his duty. She wanted to say something, but words escaped her. Instead, she simply stood there, gazing up at him, wondering what it would be like to be so strong and brave. Her parents exchanged a look of understanding. They knew how much this moment meant to Emily, and they were proud to see her so happy. They didn't want to disturb the guard's focus, but they couldn't help but smile as they watched their daughter's face light up with wonder. This was a moment they would all remember forever. For a moment, the world seemed to slow down as Emily stood there, mesmerized by the guard's stillness. She couldn't believe she was standing so close to someone she had looked up to for so long. In her mind, this was the epitome of strength and courage, someone who could stand still and unshaken no matter what. She wanted to tell him how much she admired him, but the words didn't come. Instead, she just took in the moment, soaking it all in, knowing that this was something truly special. As the moment passed, Emily's family continued to look at the guard, grateful for the opportunity to be there. But Emily's mind was still lost in the wonder of the moment, her thoughts racing. This was a memory she would treasure for the rest of her life. As Emily stood there, gazing up at the royal guard, something unexpected happened. Her legs, which had been carrying her so confidently just moments before, began to feel weak. She had been through so much in her young life. Treatments, hospital visits, and endless rounds of tests, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. She wanted so badly to stay strong, to stand tall beside the guard like she had dreamed of for so long, but the exhaustion from her illness began to catch up with her. Her parents, who had been walking beside her, immediately noticed that Emily was struggling. Her breathing became shallow, and she stumbled slightly. The joy she had felt just moments ago began to fade, replaced by the tiredness that had become an all-too-familiar feeling. Emily's small hand gripped her mother's tightly, trying to steady herself, but it was clear that she wasn't sure how much longer she could stand. The royal guard, standing completely still as he had been trained to do, noticed the little girl's struggle. His sharp eyes had been focused ahead, but something about Emily caught his attention. He saw her faltering, her body trembling slightly as she tried to stay upright. The guard's training had taught him never to break his posture, to never show emotion, and to never step out of line. But in that moment, as he watched Emily's small frame wobble, something inside him shifted. He had seen many people come and go in his years of service, but this little girl, this brave little girl, was different. He could see the determination in her eyes, the same strength he had been taught to embody in his own way. But Emily was fighting a battle he could never fully understand. She was fighting something far greater than the challenge of standing still or remaining disciplined. She was fighting for her life. Without thinking, the guard made a split-second decision that went against everything he had been trained to do. He took a small step forward, moving just a few inches from his position. The change was subtle, but to Emily, it felt like the world had shifted in her favor. As she teetered, her eyes locked on the guard, and she felt a surge of hope. He hadn't spoken a word, yet somehow his presence seemed to offer her the strength she needed. The guard, with his eyes still on Emily, gently placed his hand on her shoulder. It wasn't a grand gesture, nor was it anything that would normally be done in the presence of so much formality. But in that moment, his touch was all the reassurance Emily needed. He helped steady her, guiding her back to a place where she felt safe. The simple act of kindness meant more to her than any words could say. It was a reminder that even in the most structured and disciplined environments, there was room for compassion. Emily's mother, who had been watching with a mix of concern and admiration, let out a quiet breath. She had seen her daughter struggle before, but there was something different about this moment. The royal guard, with his stiff posture and serious face, had somehow softened in the face of a little girl's courage. She could see how much this meant to Emily, and she couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude toward the guard. Emily, her heart racing with emotion, looked up at the guard with wide eyes. She felt the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she wasn't alone in her fight. The guard's small gesture had given her a new sense of hope, a reminder that no matter how tough things might get, there were still moments of kindness and understanding in the world. As Emily stood there, still feeling the gentle support of the royal guard's hand on her shoulder, something extraordinary began to happen. The exhaustion that had overwhelmed her only moments ago seemed to melt away, replaced by a new sense of strength and calm. She felt her heartbeat slow down as she stood beside the guard, her tiny hand still gripping her mother's tightly. It wasn't just the guard's hand on her shoulder that made her feel better. It was the quiet confidence that radiated from him, the way he made her feel like she was important, like her presence mattered. For a brief moment, Emily forgot about the tiredness, the treatments, and the hospital visits. All of that faded into the background as she stood next to someone she had admired for so long. The royal guard, who had been so rigid and stoic, had broken protocol in the simplest yet most powerful way. He had stepped out of his perfectly trained role to offer comfort to a little girl in need, and it had made all the difference. Emily's mother, standing nearby, couldn't believe what she was witnessing. She had always known that her daughter was a fighter, but seeing her connect with someone like this, a person who had dedicated his life to serving the palace and following the rules, was something special. It was a moment she would treasure forever. She had seen her daughter's strength time and time again, but there was something about this moment that made it feel even more significant. The guard's small act of kindness had created a ripple of hope and warmth that was hard to describe. The guard, though he had broken the strict code of conduct he had followed for years, didn't seem to regret his decision. As he looked down at Emily, he saw something in her eyes that touched him deeply: gratefulness, strength, and a quiet courage that spoke volumes. He had made a choice to step out of line, and in doing so, he had made a profound impact on the little girl who stood before him. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His actions spoke louder than any words could have. He had offered her a moment of connection in a world that often felt cold and unfeeling. The palace, with its grandeur and tradition, had been a place of formality for so long. But in this instant, it was also a place where something beautiful could happen, a place where a little girl fighting for her life could find strength in the most unexpected of places. Emily, still standing next to the guard, felt a quiet sense of peace that she hadn't felt in a long time. She didn't fully understand the weight of what had just occurred, but she knew it was important. The royal guard, with his rigid discipline and commitment to duty, had shown her that even in the toughest of times, there was room for kindness. She looked up at him with a soft smile, her eyes filled with gratitude. In that moment, she realized that sometimes it wasn't the grand gestures that made a difference. It was the small, quiet acts of care that could change everything. Her parents, watching the exchange, were overwhelmed with emotion. They knew how much this moment meant to their daughter, and they were grateful beyond words. The royal guard had given Emily a gift she would never forget, one that would stay with her long after they left the palace. It wasn't just a visit to the royal grounds. It was a reminder that even in the hardest of times, there was still kindness, still hope, and still beauty in the world. As Emily took another steady breath, she realized that the moment she had always dreamed of had surpassed her expectations. She hadn't just met a royal guard. She had experienced something far more meaningful. She had felt what it was like to be seen, truly seen, by someone who cared. As Emily stood beside the royal guard, she felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time: a sense of peace. For the first time in months, the exhaustion from her treatments and the constant fear of the unknown seemed to fade into the background. It wasn't just the guard's gentle support that made her feel better. It was the connection they shared in that moment. The quiet understanding between them, even without words, was powerful. Emily had always been a brave girl, but in that instant, she felt like her courage had been met with the same level of strength from someone else. Looking up at the guard, Emily felt a deep sense of respect. She had admired him for so long, watching videos of royal guards standing tall, never moving, never showing emotion. To her, they represented everything strong and noble, everything she hoped to be as she faced her own struggles. But now, as she stood so close to him, she realized something even more important. Strength wasn't just about standing still or following strict rules. True strength, she realized, came from the ability to care for others, even when it seemed like it would cost you something. And in that moment, the royal guard had shown her that strength in the simplest, most unexpected way. Her parents, watching this beautiful exchange unfold before them, couldn't help but feel moved by the gesture. They had always known that their daughter was special. Despite everything she had been through, Emily had always held on to her smile, her hope, and her belief in the goodness of the world. But seeing her interact with someone who had so selflessly stepped out of his rigid role to support her was something they would never forget. They understood how much this moment meant to their daughter, how deeply it touched her heart. It was a moment of human connection that transcended everything: protocol, formality, and the strict rules that the guard had followed for years. Emily's mother couldn't help but whisper softly to her husband, her voice filled with emotion. "She'll remember this forever." Her words were simple, but they carried so much weight. She knew that this wasn't just a visit to the royal palace. It was something far more meaningful. It was a reminder that even in the most difficult times, there were still moments of kindness that could change everything. Emily, her small hand still holding tightly onto her mother's, felt her heart swell with gratitude. She had spent so much time in hospitals, enduring painful treatments, and at times, feeling like no one could truly understand what she was going through. But in this moment, standing beside the guard, she felt seen. She felt like someone understood. The guard, who had been so still and disciplined, had somehow made her feel stronger than she had in a long time. She smiled up at him, a soft, sincere smile that spoke volumes. The guard, though he hadn't spoken a word, seemed to acknowledge the depth of the moment. His gaze softened as he looked down at Emily, and for just a brief second, the rigid mask of duty melted away. He didn't need to say anything. The connection between them was stronger than words. He had done something simple, yet it had made all the difference in Emily's world. As they prepared to leave the palace grounds, Emily held on to the memory of this moment with all her might. The picture of her standing next to the guard, her smile brighter than it had been in months, was one she would cherish forever. She had received more than just a visit to a place of history. She had received a gift of kindness, one that would stay with her as she continued her journey. Her parents exchanged a look, both silently agreeing that this experience had meant more than they could ever put into words. The royal guard's small act of kindness had not only made their daughter's day, it had given her something to hold on to when times got tough, a reminder that strength and kindness could go hand in hand. As Emily and her family prepared to leave the palace grounds, she couldn't stop looking back at the royal guard. He had returned to his perfect stance, standing still and tall, just as he had before. But Emily knew something had changed. She knew that for a brief moment, he had stepped out of his strict role to show kindness, to offer her support when she needed it most. That single act of compassion had created a memory she would never forget. Her mother gently squeezed her hand as they began walking away. "Did you enjoy today, sweetheart?" she asked softly, her voice filled with warmth. Emily nodded, her eyes still shining with excitement. "It was better than I ever imagined," she said. "I thought the palace would be the best part." But she hesitated for a moment before glancing back at the guard once more. Meeting him was the most special thing. Her father smiled, knowing exactly what she meant. "Sometimes the smallest moments make the biggest impact," he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. As they reached the exit, one of the palace officials approached them. He had been watching the entire interaction from a distance, and something about the moment had touched him deeply. "Excuse me," he said, his voice polite yet warm. "I couldn't help but notice your daughter's admiration for the guard." Emily's mother nodded. "She's always looked up to them," she explained. This visit meant the world to her. The official smiled. "Well, it's not every day that a royal guard breaks protocol," he said. "But I believe he did so for the right reason." Emily's eyes widened. "Will he get in trouble?" she asked, concern creeping into her voice. She didn't want anything bad to happen to the guard just because he had helped her. The official chuckled and shook his head. "No, don't worry," he reassured her. "The royal guards are highly trained, but they are also human. And sometimes, even in the most disciplined roles, humanity shines through." Emily felt relieved. She looked down for a moment, thinking about everything that had happened. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, she reached into her small bag and pulled out a tiny bracelet. It was made of colorful beads, something she had made during one of her long hospital stays. It wasn't expensive or fancy, but it was special to her. "Can you give this to him?" she asked, holding out the bracelet. "I don't know if he's allowed to accept gifts, but I want him to have it." The official took the bracelet with a warm smile. "I'll make sure he gets it," he promised. Emily beamed, feeling a deep sense of happiness in her heart. She had wanted to thank the guard, and now, even if he couldn't say anything back, he would know that his kindness had meant everything to her. As they left the palace, Emily held on to the memory of the day, feeling stronger than she had in a long time. She knew she still had battles to fight, but now she had a reminder that even in the toughest moments, kindness could appear when she least expected it. As the days went by after their visit to the palace, Emily couldn't help but think about the royal guard. She often found herself daydreaming about that moment when he had stepped forward to offer his support. It felt like something out of a storybook, yet it was real, and it had happened to her. The bracelet she had given him sat on her dresser, a small reminder of the kindness that had touched her life in a way that words could never fully capture. Her parents noticed the difference in her too. While she was still the same strong, brave girl they had always known, there was a new light in her eyes. She seemed a little lighter, a little more hopeful, and her smile had grown brighter. It was as if the simple act of kindness from a stranger had given her a new strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead. One afternoon, a few weeks later, Emily was sitting in the living room, flipping through a book when her mother walked in holding an envelope. It was neatly sealed with a royal crest. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She had no idea what it was, but her curiosity immediately took over. "Who is that from?" she asked, her voice filled with excitement. Her mother smiled, sitting beside her. "It's a letter for you, sweetheart," she said, carefully tearing open the envelope. Emily's heart raced as her mother unfolded the paper inside. It was a letter from the royal guard. The letter was short but meaningful, and as her mother began to read it aloud, Emily's eyes filled with emotion. The letter thanked Emily for the bracelet she had given to the guard. It spoke of how he had been deeply touched by her kindness and how it had reminded him of the true meaning of his role. The guard wrote that the bracelet was now something he wore every day, a symbol of the strength and courage that had inspired him. Emily's hand flew to her chest as her heart swelled with pride. She had never expected to receive anything in return, but this letter, this acknowledgement, meant the world to her. She had made a difference in someone else's life, just as he had done for her. Her mother finished reading the letter and set it down gently. "Do you see, sweetheart? Your kindness didn't go unnoticed. You've touched someone's life just like he touched yours." Emily nodded, her heart full. She had always believed that small acts of kindness mattered, but now she truly understood how much of an impact they could have. The letter from the guard wasn't just a thank you note. It was a reminder that kindness had the power to change the world, one small act at a time. As the months passed, Emily's health began to improve. The treatments were still difficult, but she faced them with a newfound strength, one that came from the kindness she had received from a royal guard who had broken protocol to help her when she needed it most. And even on the tough days, when things seemed uncertain, she would think back to that moment at the palace, where a stranger had shown her that compassion and humanity could always find a way to shine through. The memory of that day stayed with Emily, and she carried it with her as a constant reminder that no matter what challenges came her way, there was always hope. The royal guard's simple act of stepping out of line had given her the courage to keep going, and it had shown her that no act of kindness was ever too small to make a difference. Emily knew that the road ahead would still have its challenges, but now she faced them with a heart full of hope, knowing that kindness, no matter where it came from, was a force powerful enough to heal, to inspire, and to remind us all of the good in the world.